I've been asked to lead our group this morning in some breathing exercises. We have a full day on the agenda, and we want to take a few moments as we begin this day to kind of settle ourselves down, to calm ourselves down, to center our physical and spiritual beings. And one way to do that and to facilitate the stillness within ourselves is through breath and through our breathing, the breathing mechanism. And so with that, it ain't that deep. It's just really trying to still yourselves from within. And so with that, I just ask that each of us kind of, first of all, relax. We want to bring your attention and your awareness to your own personal pattern of breathing with your inhalation. You inhale 4 counts, you exhale 4, inhale 4, exhale 4. And if you can, bring your attention to the sound of your breath. We want to inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale, inhale, continue on your own.
Shirley, Traylor, our president, Peter Hammer, and Edwin. You all would just go as you're listed and have a good session.
On behalf of the Board of Directors of NCBL and our membership, I welcome you. Very pleased to have you all here. Very pleased to see old, in terms of time, faces and new faces. This celebration is a momentous milestone for NCBL's commitment to serve as the legal arm of the movement for Black liberation. In 1968, more than 100 African descendant men and women convened to create NCBL, a legal organization with the sole purpose of redressing the oppression endured by African descendants in the United States. It is to those courageous, committed founders that we dedicate this 50th anniversary celebration. The oppression of African American people and African American communities endures. Reactionary forces continue to attack Black and brown people in local, national, and international arenas. And those we thought went underground are reemerging with great strength and force. These conditions obstruct the achievement of the human dignity of oppressed peoples, pushing back hard-won victories in the areas of political, civil, and human rights. This is a continuing demonstration of the need for collective radical action from NCBL's members, friends, supporters, and allies. Toward that goal, our theme for this 2018 National Conference is "And Still We Rise, Linking Arms with the 21st Century Movement for Black Liberation." I am excited about the potential of this conference to generate action strategies that, working together with other organizations and people on the front lines, will protect, defend, and exalt the human rights of Black people. These deliberations that we are engaged in these last few days will play an important role in assisting NCBL to strategically chart for its future during these critical times. Welcome to NCBL members, allies, program participants, and honored guests, including our founders and founders' families. Thank you to the 50th Anniversary Committee, chaired by Adjoa and Dewey Boyd. Thank you for the excellent job that you did, the outreach, and connecting all of us together again is critical and important. Thank you to Jeff and all of the Detroit members, Desiree, who worked tirelessly. I know I saw the memos flying back and forth every day for the wonderful job that you did and the way in which we all cooperated to get this done. It's an important celebration. It's an important celebration of our past, but I think more importantly, it charts the potential of our future. And the fact that we're all in this room, coming together, some of us for many, many years, some of us who are new, who did not know, means to me that the future of NCBL, its colleagues, its allies, and its supporters is healthy and vital. And we look forward to the deliberations that you're going to have today. We look forward to the recommendations that are being made, the resolutions that are being made. I promise you that the NCBL board will take them all seriously. And to the extent that our resources allow, we will work hard and strive to implement those resolutions, recommendations, and suggestions that you make. To those young legal warriors in the room, if your participation in the last couple of days generated some thought in your mind of, I would like to define myself in the ways that are being described by some of the elders and experienced people in this room, then come, join us. We need you. We have space for you. If listening to our discussion about the need for technical expertise, about the need for NCBL to move itself into the 21st century by regenerating and revitalizing our technical capacity to reach out to our colleagues, our allies, to new lawyers. We know that lawyering and movement work today is foundation, is on our ability to communicate with our various audiences using the most modern techniques. So that if you listen to anyone describing that need and you think, I can help with that, join us. We need you. We have space for you. If you know a colleague or a friend who has that expertise, get them to join us. So I welcome all of our members, I welcome all of our colleagues, I welcome all of our allies, and I look forward to our deliberation, and I look forward to hearing from all of you. Thank you again for being with us.
Say good morning.
Good morning.
I didn't know how much I needed that breathing exercise until I was sitting there, so I want to thank you for centering me, and I hope centering others. My name is Peter Hammer. I have the honor of directing the Damon J. Cahee Center for Civil Rights, and want to welcome you to this space, which is really the judge's space, and that's how we view it. He's very excited to have you here. He often sort of calls and says, well, how are you using the space? Very important to make sure that it's mission-driven. And there's no more organization, there's no more mission-driven work that can be done in the Damon J. Cahee Center for Civil Rights than the important work that you're doing here. So welcome to our friends across the country. I've just been inspired listening to these remarks, looking through your program, recognizing the 50 years that you have come together. And I'm going to just keep repeating the sort of 50th anniversary label or theme that you're developing here about 50 years and still we rise, and how powerful that statement is, linking arms with the 21st century movement for black liberation. The mission of the Cahee Center is easy to state but very difficult to live up to. We aspire to do justice to the life and legacy of Damon J. Cahee and to do that in a contemporary setting. I often tell my own students it's important to first learn your history, right? You need to know your elders, and you need to know what Judge Cahee did. But you need to also ask, because I'm talking to law students, what would a young Judge Cahee today do if he was in law school? What would Damon J. Cahee do today if he was a young lawyer? And how would we use that same creativity and energy to take on the sets of issues that we have to address and address collectively? I also take seriously that structural racism, spatial racism, are the civil rights challenges of our generation. And we have to be training the next generation of lawyers with that mission and mentality. If you believe that, you also know that Detroit, in my opinion, is ground zero of that fight. I often tell my own students that we're the new Selma, and that we need to act with the intentionality and the consciousness and the historic obligation that responsibility delivers at our doorstep. Again, I've been inspired by your program. I'm going to be blessed to be able to participate in one of your panels this afternoon, Ending Genocide, Combating the Corporate and Government Conspiracy to Create Poverty and Homelessness. And as a representative of the law school, I also want to give a shout out to Dean Felicia Thomas. She's a warrior here at Wayne State. I know she's been the lead liaison for the work with you. She's tireless in her work. And I just ask you to try to give a slight round of applause for her and acknowledging all the work that Dean Thomas has done. So good luck in your proceedings, and it's really an honor to have you here with us. So thank you very much. And you can see the best we have.
So how do I follow that up? I just want to thank everybody for being here in Detroit at Wayne State. But I want to welcome you not only to Wayne State, I want to welcome you to our chapter of BSLA. I represent BSLA as the treasurer in my capacity right now, and we are continuing to, I guess, evolve and continuing to get our organizational outreach out to the community within Detroit. And I think having a relationship with the NCBL would be foundational and key to that. And so as we move forward in our BSLA organization, as we continue to outreach, we would need to have organizations like this that would help us facilitate the need for future lawyers like ourselves and future lawyers that are coming up through the high school and middle schools in Detroit. Like Professor Hammer just said, that Detroit is ground zero. There's a lot of things going on that we need to combat. Gentrification, racism, things of that nature are very prevalent in Detroit right now, and the need for lawyers to step up and be part of legislation, be part of trials, be part of things of that nature is key for us to continue to move forward in Detroit. So not only am I welcoming you to Wayne State, I would like to continue to have relationships with everybody here and welcome you to our BSLA chapter. Thank you.
Well, good morning. Good morning. It's really good to be here with you all, and a real honor to welcome you to this morning's plenary session. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we are guests on the ancestral lands of the people of the three fires, the Chippewa, the Ottawa, and the Potawatomi. I also want to thank the Damon J. Keith Center for hosting us this morning. And big thank you to NCBL, especially the local host committee. Dewey, Desiree, and others have worked so hard over the past year to make this happen. Our NCBL Detroit chapter has been a really essential political home for me in the past 5 years, so I'm just really honored to be part of this conversation. And finally, happy birthday to Fannie Lou Hamer.
Yes. Yes.
This feels like an auspicious day. So this morning's panel was created with a sense of curiosity and of commitment and of urgency. The goal was to hear from a younger generation of legal warriors about the visions and the views of activists today and what lawyers need to do to meet the challenges of this moment. So we're here to take stock. I feel like in some ways the world has shifted dramatically in the last 5 years. It was 6 years ago that George Zimmerman killed Trayvon Martin. 5 years ago that he was found not guilty of that murder and that the movement for Black Lives was born. It's been 4 years since Darren Wilson killed Michael Brown in Ferguson. We had the Ferguson uprisings. And then the Law for Black Lives that was born in the wake of that. So in this time, I'm thankful to be part of a generation of lawyers who's asking, what does this moment demand of us in times like this? And we also know that in the history of this country, it has always been a time like this. And so how do we challenge ourselves to think about building deeply intergenerational work to carry movements forward? I'm grateful to be part of a movement lawyering community that listens deeply to movement activists, recognizing that our legal training does not equip us for the work of freedom. Our legal training equips us to shoehorn really complex, important questions of freedom and liberation into legal frameworks of equal protection or disparate impact. But it doesn't really train us for the nimble thinking of what it means to support movements for freedom. So I see my role as a lawyer as listening to these sacred freedom dreams of movements, figuring out how to help translate them into reality. To be a lawyer, I think so often as lawyers we're used to telling movements no. No, you can't march in that way, no, you can't do that, that'll get you arrested. And instead, I'm proud to be part of a generation of lawyers who is figuring out how to say yes to movements. Yes, we can make that, help make that happen for you. I want to close this brief introduction to our panelists by quoting a dear mentor of mine, Vince Warren, who sends his regards. He couldn't be here today, but he shared some fond memories with me of being at the 25th anniversary conference where he met Drew Hill. And Vince challenges us. He says, 5 generations from now, what will Black people thank us for? And I love that question because it makes us think in really long-range terms, beyond the next 18 months, or beyond the election cycle, but really, what is going to be the lasting work of our generation that future generations will thank us for? So we have a really great panel here to help us think through those things. Marbrae stahley-butts. I'm just going to do a brief introduction here because the longer bios are in your packets. But she is a dear friend and comrade of mine. She is the co-director of Law for Black Lives, a national network of over 3,000 attorneys that are working alongside the movement for Black Lives. Marbrae has worked very hard with organizers and communities across the country to advance and actualize radical policy. Angaza Laughinghouse is a staff attorney with the Southern Coalition for Social Justice's Clean Slate Project, which provides direct legal reentry services to persons with criminal records. And Brandon Cahee is a 4th-year law student at the University of Baltimore School of Law, and he currently serves as the 49th National Chair and CEO of the National Black Law Students Association. So Brandon, I'm going to have a start with you this morning.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. Again, my name is Brandon Cahee, and I serve as the 49th National Chair of the National Black Law Students Association. I'm a fourth-year evening student at the University of Baltimore School of Law, an undergraduate, graduate of Howard University, and also a native of Houston, Texas, and now I reside in Washington, D.C. I bring you greetings on behalf of our National Board of Directors and as well as our over 6,000 members of NBSLA. The National Black Law Students Association, in which I will refer to NBSLA, has a mission to increase the number of culturally responsible Black and minority attorneys who excel academically, succeed professionally, and positively impact the community. It is not only my honor, but it is my privilege to be here today and have been asked to speak to you this morning, and to do so alongside these esteemed panelists this morning. I sincerely thank the National Conference of Black Lawyers for reaching out to have NBSLA be involved in this historic and momentous occasion, celebrating your 50th anniversary. I would also like to offer greetings from our national founder, A.J. Cooper, who couldn't be here today due to an illness in his family. NCBL and NBSLA were founded in the same year, and in a time where there was a need for such organizations to not only exist, but to lead efforts and movements that affect our communities, but also to organize and effectuate meaningful change. I thank NCBL for being a thought partner with NBSLA over the years. Now segueing into our discussion for this morning, the theme for NBSLA this year, as we conclude our commemoration of our 50th year and enter into our 51st year of the association, is shifting the paradigm, envisioning the next 50 years. Leaning on our rich history and reflecting on our historical legacy of NBSLA, we felt it to be imperative that we lead our efforts in new and innovative ways and build on the foundation that has been laid over the past 50 years and rethinking how we can create a paradigm shift as we embark and envision on our next 50 years. So I want you to consider today, how am I shifting the paradigm? From 1968 through 2018, it has not only just been a span of 5 decades, but it has been a time in which we have seen similar instances of injustices, oppression, and tactics being driven to suppress marginalized people and people of color from participating actively in society in multiple facets. During the Civil Rights Movement, such tactics made it difficult and quite frankly impossible for individuals to exercise their rights, whether it be voting, getting a proper education, and overall having to fight for the right to be treated equally, even amidst there being laws that supposedly afforded such security to all citizens under it. Therefore, the Civil Rights Movement became a period where it was time to, in a massive way, shift the paradigm and make our voices heard, and included massive demonstrations, marches, boycotts, sit-ins, and other measures to show that we as a people wanted social justice and equality under the law. Nothing is more evident that this is still the case today, given senseless killings that have occurred, suppressive tactics taking place in our legislative system to overturn critical civil rights cases to try and turn back the hands of time, and the dehumanization of our people because we want a fair and just society. Similarly, as Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. stated in his I Have a Dream speech, I have a dream that one day this nation will live up to the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. When will we see that dream realized? When will this nation rise up to live out the true meaning of that creed? So first, I want to highlight the point of collective action. Now more than ever, it is time to not only participate in the movement and engage in tough dialogues on issues that affect our communities, but to collectively make committed actions of change with other like-minded thought partners. So many times you see where everyone is rushing to the forefront to be highlighted as the main person who has jumped the gun, as being the person that said, I am taking the forefront on this issue. But how are we rather coming together as one to share our collective resources that we have to effectuate change together? This is one aspect I'm leading with my organization this year. And this is what young people are talking about daily. Such collaborations we are doing with the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under the Law, where we will be working with sharing demands for students in their universities to take their administrations around eradicating excessive use of force and implementing trainings for university police and resource officers. This was also similarly done recently at the 48th Annual Legislative Conference for the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation, where NBSLA hosted a panel in collaboration with Congressman Bobby Scott, where we had thought partners such as Barbara Arnwine, the NAACP, and the Advancement Project share and educate with others about being aware of systemic practices and new legislations taking effect that are suppressing individuals' rights to vote. We don't have to reduplicate the wheels and the resources that are already here, but show as a united front that we stand together in solidarity as we move forward to ensuring that Dr. King's dream, as stated previously, is realized. As we co-brand documents with like-minded organizations, like the Advancement Project to educate people on what is taking place regarding the school-to-prison pipeline, in which Judith Brown-Dianis leads, who is the executive director of that organization and a past former national chair for NBSLA. Are we setting up roundtables as we are considering our grassroots campaigns to bring together national and community stakeholders to lead and drive our efforts forward? Are we making joint policy statements with those brother and sister organizations to uplift and share our commonalities on issues that affect our communities? This brings to light a quote that I liked from a movie when I was growing up named Soul Food. In this movie, Big Mama, in which I have one as well that we call Big Mama, made a quote, and I know my Big Mama would say the same thing as well today. The quote was, "One finger won't make an impact, but you ball all of those fingers together into a fist, and you can strike a mighty blow." Now, we must do just that and be that fist. We must make that mighty blow. Second, I would like to highlight committed actions of change after the events are over and the marches are done. Showing up and engaging in a protest, march, and rally are very great. But what are we sharing as a community of not only what the purpose in our outcry is, but what we want people to leave invigorated about and aware about so that they can further lead and advance in their own communities these same efforts. Our advocacy and activism doesn't stop once the event is over, but the event, march, and rally should be the ignition to our passion and to advance our issues that are affecting our communities so that we can further lead grassroots level organizing campaigns to address these issues. This is something that NBSLA is also leading this year. How do we go beyond one event? How do we engage our members in new and innovative ways so that they can further feel inspired to go to their communities and lead similar actions? One way this is being done through NBSLA is through a campaign called Earn Our Votes. And for those that don't know about that, Earn Our Votes is an initiative which is led by members of NBSLA focused on voter education, mobilization, and empowerment. During the Congressional Black Caucus Week I mentioned previously, we had members from across the country come together to volunteer their time to support this campaign. And they talked about voter education and empowerment within the streets of the Washington, D.C. community. There, individuals canvassed in their local neighborhoods and had members in the community and streets learn about what it means to have their right to vote and what their thoughts are on congressional actions taking place which are suppressing their right to vote, and how they want to see systemic changes in our society. This engagement proved to be rewarding because it not only demonstrated our value to uphold our mission of the organization to be involved in the community and making an impact within it, but it also, through this experience, was a reminder to ourselves that the plight of our people and what is necessary to our survival, liberation, and progression is more than evident right now. Third, I would like to share that sharing our narrative is very important. Last, given our age of technology and our social media presence, we need to be using technology in new ways to share our messaging about the great work that we are all doing, leading, and how others can be involved in the efforts that we are so taking part in right now. It is known that we are all doing great things, but how are we highlighting and uplifting the work to these pressing issues? How are we reaching others through various tools that are at the grasp of our fingertips? Our story is only as good as what we are able to share with others that are unaware of the great efforts that we are leading and what advocacy efforts they can be leading to help advance our missions. I'm very optimistic about the role that law students can play and are playing in ensuring that we are at the forefront of these movements as they are taking place in our communities, so that we can eradicate and dismantle the many systems, practices, and norms that are challenging our communities daily. One way our Northeast region of Nebraska is doing so is by collaborating in such partnerships with the Law for Black Lives. Through their partnership, their region is working with members with education tools that will continue to empower, utilizing the education to defend and liberate our people. There will also be webinars that they are envisioning throughout the year where members can learn about leaders in social movements, what they have done in the past and what they can do in the future to combat systems of oppression that people face. Moreover, the Northeast region of Nebraska is exposing members to alternative ways to utilize their law school education and their law degree. Through their partnerships, they are conducting research on bail abolition, land reform, and reparations, which will be used as grassroots organizations to fight for such policies. Our law students are ready to take up the mantle so that we can advance advocating and supporting these important and pressing issues. And last, in conclusion, as we continue to think about how we are shifting the paradigm and embracing the theme for this conference, which is "And Still We Rise, Linking Arms with the 21st Century Movement for Black Lives," I want to leave you with these words by James Weldon Johnson that was written in one of the stanzas of Lift Every Voice and Sing. Stony the road we trod, bitter the chastening rod, felt in the days when hope unborn had died, yet with a steady beat have not our weary feet come to the place for which our fathers died. We have come over a way that with tears has been watered. We have come treading our path through the blood of the slaughter, out from our gloomy past, till now we stand at last, where the white gleam of our bright star is cast. Let us continue to rise and lead ourselves forward into that white gleam where our bright star is cast. And still we rise. Thank you.
Peace, y'all. I feel a little awkward, man. I think I made a mistake, man. So when I first heard panel discussion, I think we just gonna sit up here, they're gonna ask us questions one by one, and that's gonna be it, man. But then I come up here yesterday, man, and I see all these beautiful PowerPoint presentations and these glorious discussions and speeches being given, and I just got some notes up there. But nonetheless, man, I ain't really tripping off of it, man. Unlike when I was a public defender, now when I make a mistake, ain't nobody going to jail, man. So I'm not really worried about it like that. I know my sister got a nice PowerPoint coming up next, man. She's gonna put me to shame, but it's whatever, man. It's whatever. Before I get started too, man, I do want to say, man, I appreciate you guys just inviting me and letting me work with y'all and meet y'all, man. Back in North Carolina, you don't see none of this, man. I mean, the lawyers, I know they are suit and tie brothers. Can't talk about black liberation. Definitely can't say the word revolutionary. And I come here with y'all and I see the African clothes and the proud people, my people, man. So it feels good, man. So this presentation, man, it ain't gonna be no beautiful flowing speech. It's already. But I know that we got some questions, man. I'm gonna try to answer some of those questions and put it together as best as I can. So one of the questions that I remember hearing about was the similarities and differences between today's movement and the movements of the past. And one of those differences that I think I'm starting to see is this rise of the nonprofit, yeah, in our communities, man. So out there in North Carolina, man, some of the rural areas, I work with a lot of sisters and brothers who were formerly incarcerated, and they come out and they got the best intentions, man, want to do the most they can for their communities. And they get to saying, Angaza, just wait, man, I'm gonna do this and that, and I'm gonna change this. I just gotta get my 501c3 status. That's all I gotta do, man. So they feel like they need that nonprofit behind their name with some white folks on their board in order to be taken seriously. And in fact, man, we out there in New Bern one time, we having a clinic, I'm doing a Know Your Rights workshop, talking my revolutionary stuff all in my bag. And I noticed that the brother who organized it, man, he done invited the mayor, the sheriff, and the probation supervisor. And then he told me that they get mad at him because of the stuff that I was talking about in there. And he says that, well, Angaza, they ain't gonna give me nothing, they ain't gonna listen to me if they don't like me, so I need these folks to like me. And it's crazy, man, that even when we in these situations, these wars with some of these white folks, our people, some of our people feel so intimidated, so small, that we're scared to even demand anything from these people. Because we see them as powerful and don't see the power in our own people, our own selves, our own grassroots movements, unlike we did in the 60s and the 70s. But I think that we're getting back to that now. That's why we see these rises and sudden demonstrations in response to some of these police injustices. And when I think about nonprofits as well, before I move on, I remember one time my sister was telling me, before I go on, not saying that nonprofits don't have a role to play because they are important, but the sister was telling me, giving me a way to think about it. She said, well, imagine you got a couple old men fishing. Y'all might have heard this analogy before. A couple old men fishing, and while they're on the river doing their thing, they see a naked baby come floating down the water. So they're like, what in the world, man? They go get the baby out the water, they put clothes on him, give him something to eat, and they're just like, man, that's crazy right there. Then a couple hours later, they see another little baby come floating down the water. So they're like, oh man, we gotta get him too. Give him some clothes, give him something to eat, stop him from crying. A few minutes later, another one comes and another one comes. So they start getting them, they start calling for help. People come help us get these babies out there. People start giving them donations and money for them to do it. And they just got a little system going. They just keep saving babies, putting clothes on them, feeding them, and passing them off. So then one day, one of them says, yo, why don't we go upriver and figure out why these babies are floating down here? And the other one says, man, is you crazy? Every time a baby come down, I get $10,000. And hopefully they got a learning disability too, because I get even more money after that, man. We got a good thing going, just keep it going. So the sister told me that while we can depend on nonprofits to support our movements, we can't depend on them to lead our liberation. And that made me think about it. And then also one of the differences I think I want to talk about is the co-optation I see of revolutionary students as they go on through the system. I mean, I know a lot of folks, man, before we were classmates, before we went to college, they were talking about how they're going to do this and that. They're going to change the system. They know this ain't right. But then afterwards, I see them, man, and now they're working for banks and they're working for private law firms doing securities and investments. They might wear a Black Lives Matter shirt outside of work every once in a while. We might sit back and talk about staying woke, but they won't come to no rally, won't come to no meeting, won't come to no march, won't do nothing that I ask them to do, won't sign no petition, because they worry about what might happen if their employer finds out. So what happened, man? How these folks get so co-opted by the system? And I think I might know why, man. See, I remember when I was in college and I was 18 years old, fresh up in it, I met this woman named Tiffany, this young woman, Tiffany Wall, man. I shouldn't have said her last name. Tiffany, it's like she had a superpower or something, man. She had a way of making all the young brothers like her, but in return, she gave very little time or energy or anything, man. We was all crazy about it, though, man. So one day I get back to my dorm room, man. We had this thing called instant messages back then. So I get to my computer, and I send her a message, man. I'm like, hey, what's up, man? You want to kick it later on? And she don't respond back, man. So 5 minutes turned to 15 minutes, 15 turned to 30, 30 turned to an hour. And I'm like, man, what the hell? Tiffany hit me back, man. And so I said, you know, I'm going to go down to her dorm room, just knock on the door. Maybe she didn't get the message. Maybe she stepped out for a second. So I go knock on the door, man. Like, whoa, I should have just stayed in my own room. But her roommate opened up the door. And I look around and I see Tiffany up in there. Guess what she was doing? Chilling with another dude, man. Aww. And after I picked my jaw up off the floor, I'm like, did I give you some scissors? And then I'm going back to my dorm, man. So I'm mad for a while, man, and I'm feeling sad for about a week. And then I'm like, I ain't never talking to Tiffany again, that's it for us. And one day Tiffany come through, man. She up in the moment, she like, Angaza, just chill, nothing like that, man, just relax. Just sit back and let's watch a DVD. So we sitting there watching the DVD, and I'm still upset about it, but I don't want to bring it up to her. Because I know that if I do, she gonna get mad at me, she gonna leave, and that warm loving I was getting right there, that close embrace, even though I knew it was just temporary, it was gonna be gone. So I didn't want to rock the boat. And I realize now that Tiffany was the system, man. Some of us get close to that system right there, it embraces, we feel that warm love, and we don't want to say nothing that might mess that up. And I think that's what's happened to some of our students. They've been co-opted, been embraced through this educational system. So now they get out, get a little bit of bread, and they ain't trying to mess it up no more. One of the other questions that was asked in the class, one of the questions that was asked is, how does today's movement draw on the lessons of past movements? And I think that in the past, we saw that those movements were led by working class black masses. We saw that we got into the streets and we demanded housing and education and better wages. And today we still see similar things. Working class black masses spontaneously coming into the streets to protest police injustices or white supremacy. In North Carolina, it's been a couple times in the past 2 years when the Klan threatened to happen in Raleigh and Durham. And in response, thousands of black folks, white folks, who all our people, flooded the streets. And while this was spontaneous, it was also a result of long, steady, slow organizing in our communities. But also, I'm starting to feel like back then in the 60s and 70s, we were fed some empty promises. Promises related to housing and education and healthcare and better wages. And these promises were fed to us to calm us down, to hide the true exploitative nature of this system that we in. I mean, I think about it, man, how 50 years later our people still suffering? How our schools still separate and unequal? How our people still ain't got living wages? How we still facing gentrification, knowing that gentrification not only wipes away a community, but the institutions that support our community, our businesses, our churches, our mosques, our voting power. How were these lies fed to us? And I think that nowadays, man, young people realize that politicians will feed us a set of empty promises. So now, when we see folks like Colin Kaepernick say that I refuse to vote, we don't have to agree with him, but we should understand where these sentiments come from. I mean, how is this a true democracy? If politicians know that the majority of Americans need some type of free health care, why do we still not have it? If this is a true democracy. If politicians know that our people need living wages because you can't survive off those $7.25, we only need $22 an hour. Why do we not have it? If they know that education is the key, why education costs so damn much? Why is it not free? If this is a democracy. I think now that our people are realizing, our young people at least, that these empty lies ain't gonna work for us. But it's not enough for us to say we just not gonna vote. We're giving them a free pass with that. Nah, instead we realizing that politicians respond to consequences. So we gotta put our political hands on them and snap something. Make them feel these consequences. And the last thing I'll say before I get out of here, man, another question was, what are you excited about, man, in this movement? I don't know, I thought about it hard, man. I don't know if I'm just cynical or what, man. I don't know if excitement is the right word. I mean, I get excited over some food. I get excited when that direct deposit hit my bank account. But when I think about the oppression of my people, I just get mad, pissed off. So because of that, I gotta do something about it. And I'm proud to see rooms like this, where young folks and veterans come together so we can learn from you guys and hear your stories as we carry on the struggle. So I appreciate it, man. That's all I got right there.
How y'all doing? All right. That was beautiful. So thank you for that. So it's a real honor to be here. I have to say, Law for Black Lives in many ways is based off the blueprint of NCBL. And the idea that in fact, as we march in the streets, as we transform and deconstruct these systems, we have to have a legal arm that supports those movements. And so the radical, and I'm gonna keep on saying radical, I'm gonna have quotes with radical in them, I got a t-shirt with radical on it. The radical work of both deconstructing these systems and using law as a tool to support our movements is one that we inherited, I think, and we're just super grateful. And so for me, it's an incredible honor to stand here today with scholars and thinkers and organizers who I admire, who I've read, and who I appreciate. So I want to just start with kind of that grounding. I also want to say that it feels like a difficult day to stand up here and talk about what we're hopeful about in movement. And to your point, that's not a unique thing. I think today we're going to see the Supreme Court move even further in the direction of our destruction. And not that the Supreme Court was ever meant to save us. I think that was brought up last night. But I think that the last few years, the election of Donald Trump, or the 45th, and just the widespread and open, I think, white supremacy that is all across this country is a reminder to us of the power of our movements and also the backlash to our movements. And so I think it's difficult today as a woman, as a black woman, as an organizer, as a lawyer, to think about what I am hopeful about. But I also think the work that's happening across the country is incredibly powerful. When I think about Lucille Clifton, I'm also going to just be quoting black women for the next 10 minutes, just so y'all know that don't happen enough to go do that. But I think that we do have to celebrate today that every day something has tried to kill us and it's failed, right? And so we stand here today a product of our survival and of the lessons that we have inherited. So I want to start actually with another black woman quote from Ella Baker that I think kind of grounds us in this question of what it is we have inherited and learned from past movements. And the quote is, "In order for us poor and oppressed people to become part of a society that is meaningful, the system under which we now exist has to be radically changed. This means that we are going to have to learn to think in radical terms. I use the term radical in its original meaning, getting down to and understanding the root cause. It means facing a system that does not lend itself to our needs and devising means by which you change that system." And I think this is really in some ways the mandate of organizers and lawyers in this moment. And so I'm going to talk for the next 10 or so minutes a bit about kind of the concerns that I have in this moment that are inherited, I think, from a legacy of liberation, a legacy of fighting for liberation, and think about with this group of brilliant scholars and thinkers what that means for how we move forward. I also want to ground ourselves, and this has been heavy on my heart since last night and before then, in I think what are kind of three organizing principles of the movement for Black Lives and the Black Lives Matter movement. And those really all around anti-capitalism and racialized capitalism, around intersectionality and black queer feminism, and I think probably most importantly for this conversation today, around abolition, which I think is an idea that we are bringing our folks into, but is actually essential for us to understand what is possible and how we don't recreate what's already been done. And then lastly, I want to talk a bit about what I think is the mandate for lawyers and legal workers in this moment, and then a bit about what I'm excited about. So in terms, I think, of kind of lessons that I think it's important that we take from past movements, I think, and this is Kimberly Crenshaw's term of kind of reform and re-entrenchment. And so I've been thinking a lot, not just about the civil rights movement, and the question we got asked is how does this moment parallel with 1968, with the Attica uprisings, with folks in the street, with demands for liberation? And I think that's an important question, but I also think the question of what does this moment have to do with 1971, which is when the war on drugs began in earnest, right? And so I think there's a question for us around what does it mean when we have the ability to flex our power, when our people are in the streets demanding revolution, and then what happens next, kind of what is the clapback from that. And I think that we are living through right now the clapback in some ways to the civil rights movement, and before that been thinking lots about the Reconstruction. And so what happened between 1870 when the first black man, Hiram Rhodes Revels, walked into Congress as the first black senator, and then the 100 years it took for the next black senator to walk into those rooms, and the countless lynchings that happened, the ways in which our people were criminalized and our bodies were criminalized. What was that moment, right? What was that clapback? And I think similarly, what happened in 1968 and the Black Power movement, and in 1971 and the war on drugs, when we saw in fact more of our folks being locked up and caged than under slavery. And so this question of how do we ensure that our movements, the momentum that we create by our bodies and our communities, is not co-opted into what I think are really surface level reforms. And I think throughout history, we've seen a pattern that in response to a robust movement, the government, the state, folks who have privilege and power implement reforms that quell movement and quell rebellion, but don't actually address any of the underlying structures that brought us to this moment, right? And so we've seen over and over again these surface level reforms that don't get to the underlying issues that we actually face. And so back to Ella Baker of what are the root causes, right? And so often I think whether it's police shootings, whether it's poverty in our community, whether it's schools that aren't segregated, we again over and over identify what are symptoms and say that they're problems, right? And so we are seeing the symptoms of white supremacy, the symptoms of anti-Blackness, and we mistake them as actually the kind of root problems. And so I think today the invitation is to figure out what are actually the underlying roots that bring us to this moment, and how do we actually address those? And I think that the way in which the movement for Black Lives and Black Lives Matter has thought about its kind of guiding principles are helpful to diagnose the full scope of the problems that we face. So one of those is around racialized capitalism. BLM and Move Black Lives has a deep critique of racialized capitalism. I think there's a belief, and it's exciting, there was a study released out of Chicago earlier this month that said that half of all Black millennials believe in socialism. Which should make us really hopeful. But I think that there's this rejection of, in fact, we cannot have equality, liberty, or freedom in this country as long as we are embracing the capitalist system, right? And in this country, capitalism is deeply intertwined with Black bodies as property and chattel slavery. And so what is the understanding of racialized capitalism? How do we understand a critique that actually is not just about we don't want to see poor Black people, it's not about Black capitalism. How do we have a critique of the entire ecosystem that in fact allows and demands Black poverty, right? And how do we actually critique not just the fact of our poverty, but actually the fact of this system that underlies that? And so I think that this is not new. We inherit this from both the Civil Rights Movement, the Black Power Movement, and before that, a really deep understanding and embracing of a different economic system that doesn't actually demand our isolation or our exploitation. I think the other really important idea out of the Black Lives Matter movement that I think is key to an understanding of what is possible is intersectionality, or Black queer feminism. And shout out to both the folks in this room who have worked on that issue, and also Charlene Crothers, who just released a dope book called Unapologetic, which y'all should go get. But the idea, and I think underlying this, is that each of us deserves to walk in our full dignity. And of course, this is an idea that is borrowed from and built on the Combi Collective, which was a collection I'm sure you all know, of Black women who came together. And there's a beautiful quote that if Black women are free, it would mean that everyone else would be free, since all freedom would necessitate the destruction of all systems of oppression, right? And I think throughout our history, we've seen folks give lip service to Black feminism, but in fact in our movements, we recreate patriarchy every single day. But I think it's a really important point that we think about how in our practices, not just our politics, we are actually practicing intersectionality and Black queer feminism. And how are we moving folks who are at the margins, both of our society, of our profession, into the center and saying we are concerned with this liberation. And if we are free, all of us are free. And this is especially important in this moment for Black trans women. And I see that, I think there's a real important need to both have leadership from folks who are most marginalized, but also to name and bring those folks in meaningful ways, right? And so what does it mean if you're in a room with no Black trans women talking about liberation? Like, are we really getting there? And I think that's an important question for us all to ask, both professionally, but also in our practice and our movement work, of what that looks like. And part of also intersectionality to me is collective leadership, of what it means to have a multiplicity of leaders, to follow them and to believe deeply in the leadership of folks who are most impacted. And I often think, I went to school, I went to fancy schools, and I thought for a long time time that it would buy me a legitimacy in the rooms I wanted to operate power. And what I found was two things. One is the more school I had and the more debt I had, the further away I was from the problems that brought me to that space. And in some ways, I was less of an expert after I finished law school than I was before I started. And so I think acknowledging that hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt and lots of time in school will give you a set of tools you can use for liberation. It does not make you an expert in the issues that we face. If you've been in jail cage, right? If you've been through this system, if you've been a single mom trying to hoard your family, that is what makes you an expert. And so how do we honor and listen to the expertise of our people while using the tools we've acquired to help create pathways of liberation? The last thing, and I will save this for last because I feel like it's the most controversial. The last thing I think is really important about this moment and movement is an abolitionist framing. And when I say abolition, I think often we say abolition and what we think that means is how do we deconstruct and destroy these systems. But in fact, abolition is as much about building up systems as it is about tearing them down. And I think our reliance, and this is especially true, I think, for those of us in the legal profession, our reliance on the legitimacy of this system, because it also buttresses our own privilege inside of it, is something we have to disabuse ourselves of. And so I've been thinking lots about this. You know, I work closely with folks in Chicago. I'm incredibly proud of the organizing work that's happened there. I've been moved over and over again by their electoral campaigns, by their community campaigns, by the reparations campaigns, holla. They have done all of the things. And I think that it's important last night and yesterday, especially in this moment, that we saw a guilty verdict for a police officer who killed somebody. That matters. But it's also true that that is not what people in Chicago are fighting for, and has not ever been. And it's the same day that, in fact, we know Tamir Rice is killed, got a new job in Ohio. We don't want a police in jail, we want the police gone. Right. And that's a different conversation, right? And I think it's really important that we say that. Like, it is a change in landscape that happened because of organizing, that we can see cops who kill our people be convicted of crimes. But also, we don't think this system is legitimate. That we know this system was built to cage our people, and the punishment paradigm that somehow we can cure injustice by caging folks will not get us free. Okay. And that's really important, and we can celebrate our victories, and we should, but I think we also have to name that we don't believe that this system gives us justice, and that is why we seek to deconstruct it, to dismantle it, and to replace it, right? And so our reliance, when it's convenient on this system to give us justice, is not sufficient. And I think the folks in Chicago who have been doing work to build up new systems, to shut down the cop academy, to defund the police, have a clear understanding that although in our journey for justice, there may be some cops who go to jail, and we have to demystify that. But in the long run, jails and cages aren't actually for human beings, right? For anybody. And so I think that idea of abolition has to undergird our politics and our practice. That if we believe that cages will make us free or solve the problems of our people, we're not going to get there for anybody. And so I name that because I think there's been a beautiful movement across the country and across the globe, actually, that really has forefronted the idea of we want to not just dismantle these systems the way they harm our people, but actually reimagine what safety is, what justice is, what fairness is, and what harm looks like for our people, right? And so I think we have to really think about that as we think about what we celebrate, that it's really important that we don't legitimize this system in any way, and it's not just because it applies to Black folks, right? And it does, that is the heart of this system. It was built for and to cage us and to kill us ultimately. But actually, we don't think this system is suitable for anybody. And how do we think about and react in a politic that actually reflects those values? And I think that that's really hard because we all have been in this world our entire life. We've seen nothing different, right? And so we think, when we say justice, we think about legal systems and cages and jails. But that actually is not the imagination that we need to have. And we have folks across the country who are deeply embedded in movement, who are doing the everyday work of creating new possibles. Of saying, actually, we know that harm happens, and we don't think that cages are the place where we solve that harm, right? And we know that our people need support and love, and we think that the billions of dollars going to cages every year should be rerouted to our people to hoard them. And we don't know what that looks like. We've been in a world where this is all we've seen, and so we are in a deep, deep, deep experimentation moment where we may not get it right, and we have to embrace our failures as well as our successes. So I think that as we think about abolition, and I encourage folks to think about what that means for their practice, how are we actually questioning every single point of this system, and even when we are in the middle of our victories, questioning if that's legitimizing actually the things that we face and things against us. The last thing I would talk about is what I think is the mandate for lawyers in this moment and in this time. And I went to law school, so I wanted to be a public defender since I was 12. And it was because I saw my dad get arrested, and my mom took me to court for the arraignment. And I remember sitting there, and literally it was like they were speaking in Latin. And I was like, what's going on? Where, like, is he coming home? And I remember thinking, if I could just speak this language, if I just knew what these words meant, I would have some power in this space. I could get my dad free, I could get my people free. And I think law school disabused me of that delusion. It became really clear to me that this system is stacked, and so you can speak the language and you would still lose the war, that it wasn't built for us. And someone said this last night, that this system is working exactly how it's supposed to. And not just the criminal legal system, the child welfare system, the educational system. All of these systems were built on white supremacy. They were built on the idea of constitutionalizing the exploitation of our bodies and our labor and protecting white wealth. And what we've seen change, and this also was mentioned last night, is although the apparatus has become more colorful, we've seen some black folks, some brown folks who are in positions of power, the system remains deeply entrenched in the protection of white supremacy, white property, and white capitalism. And so I think there's a new challenge in front of us. Think about what does it mean when our people are part of the machinery that's destroying us, right? And when identity politics and representation is not sufficient, we have to think about our values and what underlies those, right? And so how do we actually engage and approach that, right? And that's a different question, right? Like, our skin folk aren't kinfolk. And that's a hard conversation for us to have, but I think it's an important one that we must have it and talk about what are the values that move us, right? And so when I talk about intersectionality, about black feminism, about abolition, those are ways that we can call into question what are the values that motivate us, right? And how do we not just tweak this system? How do we avoid this moment of reform and re-entrenchment? How do we actually transform the system? And so I think the role of lawyers in that is an important one. And I think about our role in three different ways. One is, how do we deconstruct the system? How do we delegitimize the system? And how do we democratize the system? And there was a friend who passed we had in law school who used to say, what would it look like if lawyers didn't have to exist? And so I often think, organizers often say, you know, it is my job to work myself out of a job. Like, if you're a good organizer, you should be organizing in 10 years because you already won. You got it. People are empowered now to make those demands. I think the same is true for a good lawyer. How do we work ourselves out of a system that privileges people to have access to justice, right? What is going to democratize the law for our people in meaningful ways where they know their rights and can operate and exercise those in meaningful ways. I also think it's our job, and this is a challenging one, to delegitimize this system. And so lots of us are engaged and should be engaged in the life-saving work of mitigation. Whether you're a public defender, whether you do support for folks through lawsuits, whether you do land work, it is really important that we use these tools to mitigate the harm on the bodies of our people, but it is also important that we recognize that these systems were never meant for us, and we don't want them. And so we can have the tools, we can have the privilege, and we must then disown it when we win. So I think there's a real challenge for us to say that although we rely on the tools that we've learned, to not be indoctrinated in their legitimacy. That this criminal legal system is not legitimate. And even if we can make motions and have some wins, it doesn't make the system legitimate. And that, I think, is the real feel in this moment, is we have too many black faces, a few convictions, and we think, oh, it's cool. Like, if we just reduce the population, it won't be evil or cruel or unusual, but it still is, right? Because this is not actually how we believe dignity looks like for our people. And so I think this work of deconstructing is also about delegitimizing, of saying that although we are at the forefront of this fight, that we will use these tools that we have paid for and fought for, that they are not actually the tools of liberation. They are tools in a toolbox, and it is organizing, sustained organizing. It is life-saving supportive services. It is folks having the privilege and the position and the food and the housing they need to actually wage this battle that will get us free. It would not be lawyers. It would not be courts. And I think there was a quote last night about lawyers being the architects of our movement. And I often think that perhaps that is why our movements have failed. Because it is not, lawyers should be the builders of movement, not the architects. It is the folks who actually live through this. And we are part of those folks too. But how do we actually support the building of movements outside of a legal paradigm? That the law will not save us. Lawyers will not save us. And so it is our job, I think, to democratize the privilege and access to these systems, and then to also create space for folks to imagine a whole new system. Because this isn't it, and I hope in 50 years, our people will thank us for creating the space to actually imagine something completely different. And it takes space to imagine. It takes freedom. You can't imagine in a cage. You can't imagine if you're hungry. You can't imagine if your kids have lead poisoning. You have to have enough space to imagine. And so it is our job to help create that space, but we are not the only imaginers or the engineers. And so I want to invite us into that idea of how do we actually get behind folks who are in the middle of movement. And I think for me, I came into this iteration of movement after Ferguson and stood in the streets with folks who put their bodies on the line. And they were young folks, and they were queer folks, and they were trans folks, and they had everything to lose, and no one, because of this system, they were completely disposable to the system, right? And they did it anyway. And so to me, that was a real challenge and a call. What does it mean for us to put our privilege and our bodies on the line in support of folks who are braver than we are, who are younger than we are, who are stronger than we are in lots of ways. And so I want to honor that call to action. And I think for us, it's about how do we actually open this space to give folks the space to actually do that imagining, and how do we help with the tools that we have acquired through luck, through privilege, and through real strength and work. How do we lend those tools to that fight and not architect that fight, but instead be builders in it. So I want to end really quickly with an incredible video, which is a mandate from Mary Hooks. Do y'all know who Mary Hooks is?
Yes, Song.
Yes. So Song is Southerners on the Ground. They are an organization that works throughout the South. They work on LGBTQ issues. They are dope. They are behind the bailouts. And one of the organizations, I guess, they gave both to the vision, and lots of us created the container. But I think that this mandate for me has been a place I've returned to over and over again about what is possible and what we must do.
All across the nation, from Baton Rouge to Asheville to Minnesota, black bodies and police violence is showing that this country is crushing under the weight of white supremacy. Black leadership, y'all said to us, every generation has a demand. And you're right, we do. Here's what it is. Divest from prisons, jails, courts. The vision of justice for us does not include cages. The vision of justice for us allows us to walk in our communities with safety and dignity for all black people, those that are differently able, black women, black children, queer bodies, trans women, all of our brilliance deserve that. That is public safety. So whoever's defining it, come talk to us, because we have a different vision. Get behind it or get beside us. And the organizations and the communities and the people we represent. We just getting ready. And to all of our people who are listening, all of the people across the country right now, all of our people in solidarity right now, from Canada to South Africa, all of our people in Palestine right now. This is a different moment that we are in. We have a mandate. And damn it, we gon' do it. Call and response. The mandate for black people in this time. Is to avenge the suffering of our ancestors. To earn the respect of future generations. And be willing to be transformed
you, thank you, thank you. We have just about 10 minutes left for questions, so we're gonna get right into it. We're gonna send around a microphone. I think we'll take a round of maybe like 2 or 3 questions, see if we can get through those.
I have lots of questions, but my first one is just to, can we stop saying white supremacy? Please, because if words have power, and lawyers should know words have power, we don't want to give power to those words. And I know other people are saying, well, that I tried white privilege, and some whites said, well, it isn't a privilege to be oppressors. And so the only words I could think of, we got to try and find, like you said, recreate the paradigm, is find another word, maybe Sethian mentality, and that's going back to the story of Osiris, Set, and Haru, and then Set was, I don't like being a villain, but he transformed in the end, and that gives a transformation power to Set. But right now, they're in that villain moment of Set, and if we want to call it that, that's just a suggestion, but just don't give words to that power.
Thank
or
you.
power to words.
2 more questions in this round. Yeah.
Hi everyone, my name is Aisha. I'm a 3L at Howard University School of Law currently. I know someone spoke on this. A lot of times when we're in law school, a lot of us come in knowing that we want to do this work, but our law schools tend to funnel us in different areas, and we don't know how to navigate into doing this work when we come out of law school. So for myself and for the students I'll go back to speak to at my law school, like how can we get into this work right after law school if we know that this is what we want to do?
So direct pathways into this book.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Let's do a couple more questions. Yes, sir.
I have a question for Mark. I understand the urge, perhaps the need to dismantle the system, elements of the system. You talk about getting rid of the police, dismantling the prisons. I've talked to people in the community, and they aren't interested in getting rid of the police. They want the police to protect them. They want the system to work for them. And I understand that elements of the system need to be abolished or eliminated. But I confess, I haven't envisioned a system where there are no police, where there are no prisons. So I'm interested in your views on what that might look like.
All right, one last question. Yeah.
I was perhaps born before my time. I was part of the founding of the SNCC movement. And we understood that direct action, protest, going to jail was part of what we were doing. But it was not all of what we were doing. What we needed to do was not just participate in a whack-a-mole solution, but we need a systemic solution. And one of the things I worry about when I sit here as one of the founders of NCBL is that we concentrate too exclusively on the courtroom as a vehicle for liberation. It is not. It is the people who make the laws, the people who appoint the judges, the people who design the courtrooms, the people who buy the paper that goes into the pleadings. We need to have a deeper, more systemic, more ongoing method of revolution. We need a dark revolution. A dark revolution that takes even people in the corporate headquarters, people in political parties, and convert them to a theory and a strategy of liberation. Young people don't think that you're going to walk out and become militant and successful. You don't become successful in this world by being a militant. What you need to do, and I think it's very important for us to remember this, that we need to have a strategy of survival alongside a strategy of change. And that's what I don't hear us discussing too much in this session.
Okay, 4 very big questions that we could talk about for days. But for the next few minutes, which panelist wants to jump in first?
Can I say you?
Let me come up to the mic.
So the pathways question, I'm gonna give it to you afterwards. We're gonna have a long conversation. In terms of this abolition question, and thank you for asking it, because I think it's a really important one. I want to name a few things. One is our people want protection and they want safety. And because for the last 200 years, we have taught them the only way to get that is the police, they want the police. But if you ask them what they're actually looking for, it's not the police. And we do this exercise often when we start a space and we say, close your eyes and think about what makes you feel the most safe. And nobody, not nobody, says, oh, the police, or the sirens, or the cage I was in for those 10 years and so on. Like, no one says that, because we actually know inherently that community, that homes, that safety are things that make us safe. And so I think I also think that the origins of things is deeply important. And so it's not a coincidence that our communities are both under-policed, in that if you call the police, you can't get a cop to come. 90% of homicides and rapes in New York City go completely uninvestigated, let alone undercharged, right? And so it's not a coincidence that we are both under and over-policed. It is because the police come out of two unique moments. One in the South, the slave patrols, which is to make sure that all bodies and all labor remains exploited. And then, of course, we know black codes, and convict labor becomes a continuation of that, and the police force expands to hold the massive amount of exploitation that's necessary to keep the slavery system in place, if not in kind of absolute terms in theory, right? And in the North, police are a product of unions and of worker strikes. And so we see police springing up in the North when there's a moment of workers striking around labor issues across the North. And so we know across the country that, in fact, police were never meant to protect our people. They were never meant to save our people. They were always meant to exploit and control our people, and meant to do that specifically for white labor and white capital. And so I think it's important that we name it. It's not that we don't need mechanisms of support and protection. We do. We need systems that hold our people when they're in crisis. We need systems that hold people accountable when they do harm. But those systems don't look like guns or cages. And I think we often say, like, but if not this, then what? This hasn't been working. We've expanded police forces and cages and jails and cruelty, and our crime rates remain the same. And when they've decreased, it's actually because of the increase in real income or housing availability. And so we know that what keeps us safe is not cops and not cages, but instead it's actually supplying folks with the stability they need and the support they need to thrive. And I think we often conflate those things. And so absolutely, I don't know what comes next. And we are involved in lots of board experiments on how do we actually hold our people, how do we support folks in crisis, how do we acknowledge many of us and folks have been sexually violated, physically violated, how do we actually hold those and not ignore that? But also that what we've been doing is premised and based on exploitation of our bodies and labors, and was never meant for us and isn't good for us and doesn't serve us. And so I think it really does require the space to imagine what folks need. And I think very often when I'm in community spaces, people say we want more police, and I say, what do you actually want? Like, what is it that you actually are seeking? And it's not the police, it's stability, it's having a break from violence, it's figuring out how you get the support you need. And the police are the only thing that we have funded, and we have funded them at trillions of dollars. We have overfunded them. 50% of most budgets in city municipalities go to the police, not to housing, not to drug support, not to child care, not to transportation. We have fed a single beast, and now we're like, but there's nothing else. Of course there's nothing else, we ain't funded it. So I think we have to ask ourselves this question of what do we actually imagine when we say protection and safety? And it's not police, and it's not caging. And so kind of engaging with our folks in that exploration, I think, is important.
Angaza or Brandon, do you want to respond to any of the questions of pipelines into this work?
Just real quick, when it comes to pipelines into this work, man, I don't think that the job that we have at 9 to 5 necessarily defines who we are, the type of work that we do. I mean, for years, I've seen brothers and sisters working in the union in North Carolina that might have been whatever working for the city, plumbers, whatever it might be, but still in their communities, in their unions, they were still leaders and activists. So whatever your job might be, man, I don't think that defines you. At the same time, you still have a whole life outside of your work. And when I came out of school, I thought for sure that I was going to get a job working for a nonprofit serving my people. But these folks wouldn't hire me for some reason. Right? But that still didn't stop me from doing the work that was important to me. I just got somebody else to give me a 9 to 5 and pay my bills while I still did what I want to do for my people.
Okay.
So yeah, that's it.
So I think we do need to, we're over time. Do we need to head into the next session?
Before y'all head out.
Yeah.
I think we should take an opportunity to look what we have here. I've been coming to NCBL for 40 years. And we had 3 generations right here. Something NCBL always strove for. We have manifested it here today. We look around and see who's here. You have to, one, give a hand to the Detroit chapter to help us put this on. But also, you got to get the staff out here. They're taking the time out to come here, and I don't think anybody's going to leave here to go back to their regular 9-to-5s. Now, I'm like Angaza, I do have a job that allows me to live my dream. I put people to work. I train folks. 50 years ago, I was in the Black Panther Party, striving to see what I'm going to do. 50 years later, I hear the same conversations we're talking about as far as repression and all that. I had hope then. I still have hope now. So let us leave this place. We probably not going to be together like this because folks are going to be going to their different sessions and going away. So just take this opportunity and appreciate what we've done here today.
Thank you. So I think this opening plenary has been, oh yes, yeah.
My name is Lennox Hine. I came in late. But I want to thank this panel.
Yes.
And why do I say this? We organized an organization of radical lawyers. Some of us, 50 years ago, had a vision. And when I am hearing young people standing up and giving us a new perspective, this is what NCBL needs. We need the infusion of youth. We need the infusion of radical thought.
Yes.
We need the infusion of the youth who will kick us in the butt. Capitalism is like an oyster. It takes in the most radical, abrasive elements, like pebbles, stones, secretes juices on it, and turns out what? Pearls. Many of us, 50 years ago, were, as we hear the youth in among our ranks, that was us. Many of us have become pearls, but we don't recognize it. We still think we are abrasive elements. But the reality is that we have become pearls, but not in our own minds. And so I thank our youth for radicalizing us, challenging us, keeping us on our toes, raising the issues of how do we bring unorthodox ways of challenging this constitutional order. We need to rethink in many ways how we have used the law and what it means for our people. This movement of youth will in fact be on the streets. We have no control over that. But we have 3 choices I've said over and over again. We can stand on the sidelines and jeer. We could try and get in front to stop them and be run over. What I am hearing our young people say is join and help bring you our wisdom, because we have existed and have grown old, not by being foolish, And so there are things that we can advise our young people on. But don't get in the way, because they have a new mission and we have to support it. So thank you.
Thank you, Larry. Thank you again. Oh, Julie, one second.
I just wanted to say that when the panel started out with you giving honor and praise to our sister, Fannie Lou Hamer, I knew it was going to be a kick-ass, seriously, unapologetic, revolutionary panel. And I just want to lift you all up and say that's the only way that we're going to win this battle, is to be unapologetically resisting at all costs every single time, resisting the patriarchy that controls our voice and stifles us, resisting all of the backwards ass stuff that we're used to going along with and not saying anything and collaborating with it. Thank you for pulling the covers off a lot of it today. And I'm a pull the covers off kind of girl, and I appreciate it. I appreciate the truth, and I appreciate the passion with it, and you're giving praise to Fannie Lou Hamer. Yes. We should be doing that throughout the day today, and you started us off with that. That shows me that we are on the right path, and we're going to win this one.